What happens when a weekend getaway in rural Vermont turns into a nightmare of anxiety and unraveling trust? What do you do when someone is out to get you, but you don't know who to trust? Can you even have confidence in your best friends? I'm Nox, and this is the story of Fears to Fathom Woodbury Getaway. Sydney Harper is a consultant in the city who works long hours at the office. She constantly daydreams and stares out the window, frequently distracted. Her friends, Mike and Nora, encourage that they should all take a road trip to a rural part of Vermont for a weekend of relaxing out of the city. Sydney sets up all of the logistics. Sydney goes online and makes the rental arrangements. Sydney waits for Mike. They agreed to travel together, with Nora meeting them there since she was coming from a different direction altogether. Mike arrives and appears to be a bit clingy from calling Sydney constantly before the travel day and being abrasive that her hugs aren't good enough, insisting on a better one. Gonna go ahead and add Mike to my people not to trust list. Leave a like if you think Mike is creepy. While riding, Sydney daydreams the best she can as it starts to snow. Mike, on the other hand, prefers to chat. After continuing through what seems like endless wilderness, the pair arrive at a small town, the last one on the trip, and decide to stop for pizza before making the last part of the journey. They order pizza, and while waiting, Nora sends a voice memo explaining that she got held up at work and will be arriving later than planned.
So late, but I gotta keep them happy.
The fresh and hot pizza is served, and they both dive in, hunger clawing at their guts. The bliss doesn't last long, as a man approaches their table unsolicited. He laments that he's walking the same direction he saw them driving from and would love to hitchhike. The hitchhiker's attitude turns sour as Sydney refuses his request for a ride, as he leaves her with a message: "You ain't too kind, are you? Unkind people meet unkindness themselves. You best be careful out there." The hitchhiker leaves as Sydney can't help but stare out the window as he heads off down the road, the words leaving a chill down her spine. After finishing dinner, Sydney insists on driving since Mike has driven so long already. He's reluctant but eventually caves to Sydney's metaphorical arm twisting. The duo ride in mostly silence, a combination of being full on food and weather that's turned slightly worse as they head deeper into Vermont. Finally, after a multi-hour drive in the snow and darkness, they arrive to their destination. Sydney climbs out of the truck and, with suitcase in hand, heads to the front door. She pauses halfway up the walkway as she sees a shape in the second-story window. It looked like someone was watching from inside and then walked away. Sydney blinks and blames it on the long driving and the snow circling through her vision.
Must be imagining things,
She thinks to herself. Noticing an exterior basement door by the porch, Sydney shuffles over in the snow to get a closer look. It appears locked and has an elementary picture of a house carved into the metal with the words "Home Sweet Home" adjacent to it. Using the code provided by the owner of the rental, Sydney acquires the key and they head inside, the warmth of the cabin a delightful welcome contrast to the brisk cold outside. Mike saunters off to the bathroom, and Sydney tries to pretend she doesn't hear the brutality of sounds emitting from that door. She puts the groceries away that they brought with them, taking mental note of the items. 2 cartons of milk, lemons, peppers, eggs, yogurt. Must be planning to get something for entrees later, she wonders. After Mike returns, Sydney takes her turn holding her breath. They proceed to explore the house. Upon inspecting the bedrooms, the homeowner, whom they did not expect to be here, was inside the house. He says, "Welcome to my home, sweet home." And Sydney has mild flashbacks to the carvings in the basement doors. He welcomes the cute couple, and Sydney quickly corrects him that they're not a couple, hurting Mike's feelings in the process. Rick proceeds to give them a tour of the house, room by room. Sydney notices he also peeks in their fridge, commenting on its contents. Rick concludes the tour with the basement water heater. The pair notice a door with a sign, "No access to guests," and inquire about it. The owner is dodgy and reminds them that renters shouldn't come to the basement unless they need to relight the water heater. Before leaving, Rick informs them that the basement is potentially haunted, trying to ward them away from the basement at all costs. He inquires of Sydney's name, admitting that in his old age, he can't remember. As the evening waxes, Mike invites Sydney to go fishing in the creek behind the cabin, conjuring the idea that they could make a meal with the fish they catch. The two proceed to fish in the creek and manage to catch a few fish. Sydney relaxes a bit, The cold air is crisp, but refreshing. In the twilight, she sees what appears to be a figure on the bridge up the creek. With the snowfall and the low light, it's hard to tell.
Is someone out there? I don't know what I'm stressed about. There's other cabins out here. Other people will be around.
After fishing, they return to the cabin to prepare dinner. Sydney notices the fridge door slightly ajar. Not thinking much of it, she closes it and helps Mike cook with the fish. However, while searching for ingredients in the fridge, Sydney notices that one of the milk cartons is missing.
I could have swore we had 2 cartons of milk here.
After dinner, Mike insists he needs to go use his laptop upstairs and check his email. Moments later, Mike texts Sydney, "Think someone's under my bed." Sydney's heart thrums in her throat. Her skin raises in goosebumps as she starts to slowly walk upstairs. Mike texts again, "Walk slow." With her heart about to burst from her chest, she slowly opens the bedroom door. And it was just Mike playing a prank. You know those horror movies where they just play pranks on each other constantly until it's not a prank anymore? Yeah. Also, this game is full of Easter eggs and secrets, so be sure you get subscribed so you don't miss out on upcoming content about that. After Sydney's heart rate returns to normal, Mike insists it was just a joke and that they play a few rounds of hide and seek. A little bit reluctant, but the pair takes turns hiding and seeking throughout the cabin. On one of Sydney's turns, she goes outside to the shed instead. Being careful not to leave too heavy of footprints, she crunches through the snow to the shed. From inside, she peeks through the window blinds, watching Mike look all over the house through the windows until he eventually decides to check outside. Sydney gulps, a lump in her throat as it looks like someone is in the house, with Mike clearly outside. She rubs her eyes again, and no one is there.
I really need to sleep. I keep imagining things.
She whispers to herself. After being found, Sydney seeks for the final round and assumes Mike went inside. As she gets into the cabin, she hears banging on what sounds like pipes. She follows the sound, Mike obviously wanting to be found. She sneaks up on the door, ready to scare him, only to find Rick in the house again. Mike rushes over at Sydney's scream. They interrogate Rick about why he's in the house again, only for Rick to grow irritated. They have a rather tame argument. Rick, exasperated with them, tells them not to call him if there's any more issues then, and storms out. Mike and Sydney discuss the situation and decide Rick is likely harmless and just lacking complete social awareness. Oh yeah, that's what y'all think? Sydney eventually heads off to bed after a long day, only to be abruptly awakened shortly later by knocking on the bedroom door. She groggily gets out of bed, her eyes heavy from sleep. As she opens the door, she sees Mike standing before her. "Can we talk about something?" he asks her. They talk about the snowstorm and how Nora will have to drive slow to make it to them. It seems like it'll be late in the night before she arrives. Mike talks for a moment, starts to push and confess his feelings to Sydney. Confused, she asks,
Where is all this coming from, Mike?
Mike thinks for a moment. "You act like you don't remember our trip to Oregon." Sydney sighs, replaying the awkward memories in her head.
I remember it being pretty awkward, actually.
As Sydney tries to defuse the situation, a voice message from Nora drops into their group chat. Nora's message reveals she had a tire blowout and needs someone to come get her. Mike insists that he'll go and get Nora, while Sydney can stay in the cabin to rest. How thoughtful. Before leaving, Mike insists on a hug. Sydney, feeling weird about the previous conversation, reluctantly gives in. As he leaves, she sighs heavily and returns to sleep. Sydney's awoken again to someone repeatedly hitting the doorbell. She gets out of bed and slowly makes her way downstairs. The thought of someone being outside this late at night sending shivers up her back. She glances out the window but can't make out who the silhouette is. Her heartbeat throbs in her ears. Sydney calls out to the mysterious person. A man calls back, apologizing for the late night knocking, and mentions his friends are a few hours behind schedule and explains how cold it is outside. Sydney offers to let him stay on the porch, but he insists that he was hoping to come inside. When Sydney refuses, he becomes quite angry, and then when the outsider mentions the pizza joint, Sydney's blood runs cold. He steps back a little bit in shock as he reveals he was watching from the creek bridge.
You need to leave! I'm calling the police!
"Ain't no cops around here," he says, his vague threat piercing the snowfall, pattering at the windows. He finally walks away from the door. Sydney rushes back upstairs and locks her bedroom door. It feels like the safest option while she waits for Mike and Nora to get back. Sydney sits in bed, her back to the headboard. She closes her eyes, mostly just trying to rest, but unable to actually get a proper night's sleep. Suddenly, she hears a masculine scream outside. Sydney jolts up, worrying about the hiker and what they said about the police. She texts Rick in a panic, asking for him to come back over. Moments later, the doorbell rings. Sydney hopes for Rick, but still takes very cautious and focused steps, just in case. Sydney listens to the door and hears Rick call for her. She lets out a deep sigh of relief. She opens the door. Rick enters bearing a large hammer. She explains everything to him. "I wouldn't worry about him anymore," he reassures her. Rick inquires about where Mike went. When she reveals he's gone but will be back soon, Rick smiles. "So, you're all alone, huh?" He helps himself and walks into the living room where he warms up by the fire. Sydney is still a bit uncomfortable, but Rick is probably way better to deal with than the hitchhiker. Probably. Sydney paces around the main foyer, exhausted but riddled with anxiety and just ready for Mike and Nora to arrive. Her phone beeps with a message from Rick. Upon reading the text message, Sydney's spine stiffens with fear. "Come back over? What do you mean? I live in Burlington. I haven't been to the rental in weeks." Sydney looks up from her phone, trying not to look at Rick. "Awful late for texting, isn't it?" He speaks from beside her. "Who you talking to?"
My friends are almost back. I'll be fine now. You can head back if you want.
"Maybe I should stick around. Make sure everything's really okay," Rick says with a strange smile. Sydney takes in a deep breath.
You're not Rick, are you?
Fake Rick stares at Sydney, his eyes as dark as coals. "This is my house. I will leave when I want to," he shouts at her in a dreadful tone. Fake Rick shoves her aside and goes to the front door and starts beating the handle with his hammer. In the moments of his distraction, Sydney rushes downstairs to the basement, her memory of hide and seek with Mike guiding her, and dips into the closet under the stairs. Above her, Sydney can hear Fake Rick sliding furniture around, stomping about. He eventually makes his way downstairs to the basement, Sydney holding her breath. It feels like an eternity passes before she finally stops hearing anything. With her head pounding from stress, Sydney slowly walks to the basement stairs. Over to her left, she catches a glimpse of the door that was not allowed to be opened earlier and notices a mattress on the floor inside. Carefully to avoid any creaking, Sydney slowly goes up the basement stairs, only for Nora to call, her phone betraying her location. Rick now steps out of the open room downstairs. Sydney bolts upstairs, Fake Rick now completely aware of her. Fueled by adrenaline, she makes it into her bedroom, locks the door, and hides inside the closet. Her heart thunders so hard, she worries it could even be heard from outside. Holding her breath again, Fake Rick looks around the bedroom, but a truck arriving outside stops his attention before he can check the closet. Sydney climbs into the attic through an entryway in the closet while Rick is distracted and waits there, unsure of what to do. A while passes, and the real Rick texts Sydney that he's called 911. Sydney eventually hears sirens in the distance and slowly climbs down out of the attic and down the stairs. The back door is wide open, the frigid cold infecting the house. The front door splinters off the hinges as Mike and Nora arrive, having tore it down. Fake Rick, however, nowhere to be seen. Likely have escaped out the back when he heard the sirens. It seemed that Fake Rick lived in the cabin when it wasn't being rented, and hid in the basement when people were there. At first they wondered if he was just going to hide, but he became quite belligerent and rageful in the end. Sydney has no doubts that he would have killed her had he found her in his madness. Given the scream that she heard earlier, it's very likely that Fake Rick injured or even killed the hitchhiker for invading in his home. Rick asks for a description of the Fake Rick, and then proceeds to discuss nothing further on the matter. It would seem that maybe Rick knows more than he lets on. Perhaps Fake Rick was a previous owner of the cabin and forced to give it up due to foreclosure or other dreadful circumstances. Or maybe Fake Rick was a previous renter who just never actually left. What do you think about Fake Rick? Drop a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are. Thanks for watching.